here's part two of your Get Organized video from Mrs. Zahn. So we're talking about strategies for how to read informational text. Almost everybody, when they have been reading informational text, sometimes feels like this, huh? I don't get it. So what does a good reader do when you're experiencing that, especially when you're reading informational text? We're going to walk you through several strategies that can help you. The first one is when you're reading informational text, slow down. Most people read informational text more slowly than you read a fictional, a made-up story kind of text. It has more challenging vocabulary. You're going to need to slow it down a little bit. Sometimes it can even help to read it out loud. Warn your family that you're going to be reading out loud so that they don't think you're going crazy or anything, but it's actually a pretty good strategy. If you're in a section of your informational text that is really making you say, huh, I don't get it, read it out loud. It often helps. You know, sometimes when you ask your teacher for help at school and they say, hey, why don't you read it out loud to me? And it actually answers your own question and we don't actually say a thing. That strategy really works. So read things out loud, slow down when you're reading informational text and you feel like you don't get it. Another thing that you want to do when you come to that time in your informational text where you say, I just don't get it, ask yourself, did I actually have my brain turned on? Now, that's not a diss. It's just a fact that sometimes we start reading and we're still thinking about what we were doing outside. We're still thinking about what's for dinner. We're thinking about, man, I wish I could still be playing basketball, whatever it is. And we really didn't have our brain turned on for the topic of our reading. So a couple of things that you can do to make sure that you have your brain turned on is ask yourself, what do I already know about this topic? So let's say you're reading in your social studies newspaper and you see the word Constitution in the title. Ask yourself, well, okay, what do I already know about that? Mrs. Berry has already taught us some things. I know a little bit. I've been hearing about it on the news a little bit. I heard my parents talk about it. Ask yourself, what do I already know? That's a little strategy for flipping the switch to turn on your brain that will help you understand your reading. Then as you continue to read, ask yourself, is the information that I'm reading new? Is the new information that I'm reading the same as what I already knew? Or is this new information different from what I had heard before? Don't assume that it's going to match up. Sometimes we may have had some misinformation or may have misunderstood something along the way, or maybe it's just adding to what we already know. So when you don't get it, I don't get it, a couple of strategies. Slow down, maybe even read it out loud. Make sure that you turn on your brain. You do that by asking yourself, what do I already know about this topic? And then as you read, ask yourself, is this new information the same or different as what I already knew? Then, another thing that can really help is don't read the whole thing at once. Read just a short chunk or a paragraph. Again, slow it down, maybe even read it out loud. Then when you've read that short chunk, actually look up and think, what did that just tell me? Sometimes you'll say, oh, I can totally tell me what it says. I'm good to go. In that case, move on to the next chunk and repeat. Look up and think, what did that just tell me? Do I know? Yeah, I can say what it told me. Then I can go on. But other times, and this happens to everybody, even good readers, you'll look up and think, what did that just tell me? And if you're honest, you say, I have absolutely no idea. I truly don't know. I don't get it. If that happens, here are some things that you should do. Number one, read the chunk again. Don't forget, read it more slowly, maybe read it out loud, and then look up and think again. After you look up and think again, then you repeat. Do I know? I can say what it told me, then I can move on to the next chunk and keep going. But if I don't know, I'm going to back up, read that short chunk or paragraph, ask myself, what did that just tell me? And keep repeating that. Don't assume that that makes you a bad reader. It doesn't. It happens to everybody. Sometimes it's because we just really didn't have our brain turned on. Other times it's because it's just a challenging read about something we don't have as much background information about. And slowing down and rereading those short chunks, and each time thinking about what you actually read, it actually helps. It doesn't seem like, well, that's not exactly this new genius kind of strategy. No, not really. It's actually a strategy that you've been using since you were first learning how to read in first grade. But that's a strategy that you will use always. Your parents use that strategy. I use that strategy. Anybody who's reading informational text is going to use that strategy of reading a short chunk. Look up and ask yourself, what did that just tell me? If you can say, great, move on. Go to the next paragraph. But if you don't know, don't just go on and say, oh well. Take the time to reread it and rethink it. Quick review of all of those. What do you do when you say, I just don't get it when I'm reading informational text? Slow down, maybe even read aloud. Make sure that you have your brain turned on. Then break that informational text into short chunks and paragraphs. Look up and think, what did that just tell me?